officer Cariel Horn in a battle tonight to get her pension. She was fired for trying to stop a fellow officer she says was abusing a suspect. And tonight she is telling her side of the story to 7 Eyewitness News reporter Kendra Eaglin.
November 1st, 2006, there was a call of an officer in trouble at 707 Walden.
That officer, Gregory Kwiatkowski, who was responding to a domestic dispute inside of that home between Neil Mack and his girlfriend. When Officer Cariel Horn went into the house, she says Mack had already been placed under arrest.
He was handcuffed in the front, and he was sideways and being punched in the face by Gregory Kwiatkowski.
Horn and about 10 other officers who arrived at the scene helped drag Mack out of the home, but once outside, Horn says Officer Kwiatkowski was out of control.
Gregory Kwiatkowski turned Neil Mack around and started choking him. So then I'm like, Greg, you're choking him, because I thought whatever happened in the house he was still upset about. So when he didn't stop choking him, then I just grabbed his arm from around Neil Mack's neck.
If that chokehold of a handcuffed suspect caught Horn off guard, it didn't prepare her for what she says Kwiatkowski did next.
He comes up and punches me in the face, and I had to have my bridge replaced.
Horn says other officers pulled her back when she tried to defend herself. Following that incident, Horn was fired, charged with obstruction for jumping on Officer Kwiatkowski's back and or striking him with her hands. But Officer Kwiatkowski's own words seem to conflict with the charges. In sworn testimony, he says, she never got on top of me. Nonetheless, Horn lost every appeal, her 19-year career over, and she didn't qualify for a pension. The breadwinner for her 5 children, Horn, now a truck driver to make ends meet.
My daughter said, Mommy, why did you go to work that day? She never said, why did you do what you did, or I wish you wouldn't have done it. She just said, I wish you wouldn't have gone to work that day. So, I don't regret it.
Officer on the job, a separate incident of punching another officer when he was off the clock, and most recently, Kwiatkowski and 2 other officers were indicted on civil rights charges for holding down a black teenager and shooting him with a BB gun. Update, but we haven't heard back yet. Joanne.
This is Mike Wood. He joined the Baltimore Police Department in 2003 when he was 24, but retired last year with a shoulder injury, disillusioned and feeling as if he was hurting the people of Baltimore more than helping them. He's a friendly, outgoing, and charismatic guy. For the past month, he's gotten a lot of practice at being camera ready. After going on a Twitter rant in which he revealed a series of awful things that he saw his fellow officers do while on the job, he has become the go-to dissident in the law enforcement community for journalists everywhere, an informed critic with an inside view of a culture that has come under unprecedented scrutiny over the past year. For all the talking Mike has done since going public with his stories, I didn't feel like I had a clear understanding of what being a police officer in Baltimore was actually like for him, what the job had demanded, and how the culture of the Thin Blue Line had affected his thinking about the role of cops in the lives of Baltimore's least fortunate, most vulnerable residents. With a notebook full of questions, I headed down there and asked Mike to give me a tour.
There's nobody here.
We drove through his different posts, starting with the Baltimore Police Academy, the place where new recruits go to train before they're sent out into the street.
You guys can see what it is. It's a refurbished, abandoned school. It's disgusting on the inside. Like, that's one thing that gets lost a lot, is how the officers are actually treated in Baltimore, and they are not treated good. Like, the Eastern District where I was would have literally sinks hanging off the wall.
He told me story after story that would leave anyone dumbfounded and angry.
Boots him in the face as hard as you can. He just turns and just smacks her, like, open God out, and threw the guy's shoes onto the roof.
I had heard about some of this stuff already from Mike's Twitter feed. What I really wanted to understand was why it happened. How does this culture of contempt and violence towards black people take hold in a police department like Baltimore's? And how is it perpetuated, even after an entire year of police scandals being in the headlines?
Library in Wilmington, North Carolina. There was one thing you weren't allowed to research.
We were refused. We were rejected by the librarian.
When I asked about or inquired about 1898, they wanted to know why.
I was told that, yes, they had something, but they kept it under lock and key.
The story of Wilmington in 1898 still isn't widely known.
What happened here on what's now just this empty patch of grass would radically change racial politics in North Carolina.
This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history. the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city. It had a majority black population, and historians today describe it as a rarity in the post-Civil War American South.
Wilmington, prior to November 1898, was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also black elected officials. And for a time, that was true throughout the state. Take a look at the politicians on this poster of the 1889 North Carolina House of Representatives. Here at the bottom are black Republican representatives, some from Wilmington. North Carolina also sent 4 black Republicans to the U.S. Congress between 1875 and 1899. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
Republicans in North Carolina were successful in part because of a third party called the Populist Party, made up of mostly white farmers fed up with the tough economic times. North Carolina populists joined up with Republicans to form what they called the Fusion Party. And in the elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusion Party defeated the Democrats in sweeping victories statewide. That meant North Carolina now had a government that shared power between black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Together, they moved towards reforms that would favor black Americans and working-class whites.
This was something that the Democratic Party folks were simply not going to accept.
A multiracial government wasn't just a disappointment for Democrats. It was more like a humiliation. They needed a plan to take back control of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters. Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The State Democratic Party Handbook for 1898 laid out their goal: consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. It said, "This is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it." Their most effective tool was the media. One of North Carolina's biggest newspapers was a Democratic Party mouthpiece. It ran racist political cartoons throughout 1898.
Not everybody was literate in 1898, but to see a political cartoon of the type that ran, you may not be able to read it, but you know exactly what it means.
Many of the cartoons were centered on the threat of Negro rule, even though the fusion government was mostly white. They also played up another fear.
Black men threatening white women became a theme. White men need to do all that they can to protect white womanhood.
This was all part of North Carolina Democratic strategy, but it echoed the national racist rhetoric of the time. In one speech that Democrats printed in a Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
"If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch."
Her speech prompted a Wilmington black man named Alex Manley, owner of the black-run Daily Record newspaper.
My comments and I scroll through. You can't do it quite like I can.